The dust hung suspended in Cedar Creek's afternoon light, golden particles frozen in time like the collective breath of the onlookers. For 3 days, the massive black stallion had defied every man who dared approach it. 30 attempts, 30 failures, some spectacular, sending bodies flying through air that tasted of sage and disappointment, others quieter whispered retreats that left nothing but wounded pride and muttered curses in their wake. The corral fence bent inward, under the weight of the town's expectations. Children perched on the top rail, legs dangling, while their fathers leaned against weathered posts that had witnessed a generation of broken spirits both equine and human. The Mustang stood in the center, sides heaving, nostrils flared crimson, a creature of the mountains now imprisoned by mere wood and man's determination. "That devil's got the spirit of Lucifer himself," Tannery muttered, spitting a stream of tobacco that landed with precision at the base of the fence post. "Killed Abilene's boy last spring. Broke Jenkins' back up north in the territory. Nobody corrected him about the exaggeration of Abilene's son. Merely injured, not killed, because legends grew faster than truth in places where entertainment came rarely." Amelia Thornwood watched from the shade of the mercantile's awning, her substantial frame creating its own shadow that stretched toward the corral like a reluctant participant. The whispers followed her as they always did, carried on the same breeze that brought the scent of horse sweat and masculine frustration. Bigger than my wagon. Husband died of consumption 5 winters past. Makes those pies for the church social. Wonder how many she eats herself. She let the words slide off her like rain from oilskin. At 42, Amelia had weathered harsher storms than whispers. The leather of her boots creaked as she shifted her weight, eyes never leaving the magnificent creature that pawed at the earth with hooves that could crush a man's skull. Sheriff Gaines climbed down from the corral, hat in hand, wiping blood from a split lip. "That's the last of him," he announced, "unless someone else wants to dance with the devil before we put a bullet in him." A ripple moved through the crowd, disappointment mingled with the guilty anticipation of witnessing destruction. The stallion would be shot. Too dangerous to keep, too valuable to release. The logic of the frontier was often brutal in its simplicity. "Shame," someone muttered. "Finest piece of horseflesh I ever laid eyes on." Amelia moved then, her bulk partying. The crowd, like Moses at the Red Sea. People stepped aside, not out of respect but from the ingrained habit of avoiding contact with her flesh, as if her size might be contagious. She reached the fence and placed hands that had kneaded enough dough to feed an army on the top rail. "What are you bidding for him, Sheriff?" Her voice carried the softness of rising bread, unexpected from a woman of her stature. Laughter rippled through the gathering. Even the sheriff's mustache twitched with poorly concealed amusement. "Now, Mrs. Thornwood, this ain't no riding horse for a Sunday social. Here's a killer." Amelia's eyes never left the stallion. "I didn't ask for your assessment. I asked for your price." The laughter faded as confusion took its place. The wind changed direction, carrying the scent of coming rain and woman's determination into the corral. The stallion's ears flicked forward. $2, the sheriff said finally, "though I'd rather give him to you for free than see you hurt yourself." Amelia reached into the pocket of her apron and withdrew a small cloth pouch. The coins made a decisive sound as they hit the sheriff's palm. "Mrs. Thornwood, I can't in good conscience. Your conscience isn't my concern, Sheriff." She untied her apron, folding it with the precise movements of a woman accustomed to order. The fabric made a neat square in her hands before she passed it to a wide-eyed boy at the fence. "Hold this, Thomas." No one moved to help as she navigated the narrow gate. No one offered assistance as she stood inside the corral, facing the animal that had humbled 30 men. The silence that fell over Cedar Creek was so complete that the creak of Amelia's corset stays seemed to echo off the distant mountains. The stallion pawed once, sending dirt showering against the fence, his eye, liquid obsidian, fixed on the woman who dared enter his domain. Amelia stood motionless, her breathing steady as a sleeping child's. "That's right," she whispered, voice carrying no further than the horse's twitching ears. "You and me, we understand something about being too much for this world to handle." She didn't move toward him. Instead, she turned her back and acted, drew gasps from the onlookers and walked to the water trough at the side of the corral. Cupping her hands, she drew water to her lips and drank deeply, then wiped her mouth with the back of one hand. Only then did she look at the stallion again. "Thirsty work, isn't it, being what they expect and fighting what they demand? Come drink if you've a mind to." The crowd held its collective breath as the massive animal's ears flicked forward, then back, forward again. His front hoof struck the earth once, twice. Then, with the fluid grace that made him so magnificent, he took 3 steps toward the water. Amelia didn't move, didn't reach for him, didn't try to prove anything to the watching town. She simply stood, a mountain of a woman beside a trough, offering neither threat nor demand. When the stallion lowered his head to drink, the town remained silent, but for entirely different reasons than before. Chapter 2. Dawn broke over Cedar Creek like a fever, slow, golden heat spreading across the valley. Amelia stood in the small paddock behind her cottage, watching the black stallion pace the perimeter. Sleep had come to her in fragments, her mind replaying the expressions on the townspeople's faces as she'd led the horse through the streets. Not with a bridle or rope, but with a bucket of water and the patience of a woman who'd learned that some things couldn't be forced, only invited. He'll kill her before sundown, she'd heard Tannery predict as she passed the saloon. Waste of $2, another had muttered. The stallion hadn't killed her, hadn't even tried. Instead, he'd followed at a distance of exactly 7 paces, never closer, never farther. All the way to the edge of town where her modest home stood with its back to the wilderness. Now he watched her with those obsidian eyes, intelligent and wary. The morning light caught the muscles rippling beneath his coat, midnight made flesh. "You need a name," Amelia said, her breath visible in the cool morning air. "Can't keep calling you horse or devil, can I?" The stallion snorted, pawing once at the earth. His coat still bore the marks of previous attempts to break him, a thin white scar above his left foreleg, a patch of hair that grew at an odd angle along his flank, battle wounds that told a story of resistance. "Obsidian," she decided. "That's what you are." Black glass formed in fire. From inside her cottage came the rhythmic thump of a wooden spoon against dough. Jeremiah Cross, her neighbor's 12-year son, had arrived at first light, eager to earn the pennies she paid him to help with the baking. She'd built a reputation with her bread, the one thing the town would accept from her hands without reservation. "Mrs. Thornwood," the boy's voice called from the open window. The dough's ready for the second rise. "Coming," she replied, not taking her eyes from the horse. "We'll continue our conversation later," she told Obsidian quietly. Inside, flour dusted every surface like early snow. Jeremiah stood proudly beside 6 perfectly formed loaves, his thin face flushed with effort. "You've gotten faster," Amelia observed, checking the texture with practiced fingers. "Ma says I should stop coming here," the boy blurted, then looked immediately contrite, "on account of the devil horse." Amelia continued working the dough, her movements precise, despite hands swollen with years of labor. "And what do you think, Jeremiah?" The boy chewed his lower lip. "I think Ma's scared of most things that don't fit in her Bible stories." He glanced toward the window. "Can I see him up close?" "The stallion, not today." Amelia covered the loaves with clean cloth. "He's still deciding if people are worth trusting, like you did, after Mr. Thornwood passed." Her hand stilled for just a moment. Children possessed a terrible clarity sometimes, cutting through pretense with innocent brutality. Perhaps she allowed, "Now take these coins and tell your mother. I appreciate your help." After the boy left, Amelia moved to the small mirror hanging beside her door, the only one in the house. The woman who stared back had eyes the color of weathered sage and skin that had long since surrendered to gravity's insistence. Her hair, once the color of wheat, now resembled the straw that lined her empty barn. She'd never been small, even as a girl, but grief and solitude had added layers to her frame. Protection against a world that found her excessive. A sharp knock interrupted her rare moment of self-inspection. Sheriff Gaines stood on her doorstep, hat in hand, discomfort evident in the rigid line of his shoulders. Behind him, at a careful distance, waited 3 men, among them Harold Jenkins, whose brother supposedly had his back broken by obsidian. "Mrs. Thornwood," the sheriff began, clearing his throat. "There's been some concern expressed about the safety of keeping such a dangerous animal so close to town. My property sits a quarter-mile from the nearest neighbor." "Sheriff, be that as it may, we can't have wild animals." "He's not wild," Amelia interrupted. "He belongs to me. Purchased fair and square with witnesses." Jenkins stepped forward. "That beast crippled my brother. Put him in a wheelchair for life. Your brother tried to break him with a whip and spurs." Amelia replied evenly. "I've used neither." "That's not the point, isn't it?" She filled the doorframe with her presence. "Would you be here if anyone else had bought him? If Tom Wheeler or Richard Blasingame had managed to gentle him, would you be on their doorsteps demanding they destroy their property?" The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Thornwood, we're just asking that you reconsider. For your own safety, my safety is my concern." She folded her arms across her substantial bosom. "Unless there's a law against a widow owning a horse, I believe our business is concluded." She closed the door before they could respond, her heart hammering against her ribs like hoofbeats. Through the window, she watched them retreat, heads bent in conversation that required no imagination to interpret. Later, as afternoon surrendered to evening, Amelia carried a bucket of oats to the paddock. Obsidian stood motionless in the center, watching her approach. "They want me to get rid of you," she told him, setting the bucket down just inside the gate. "Seems we both take up more space than folks are comfortable with." The stallion's ears flicked forward, then back. "I was married once," she continued, lowering herself to sit on an overturned crate. "Jacob was a good man. Quiet, saw me when I was 16 and declared I was a woman worth building a life around." Her voice softened with memory. "Never once made me feel like I was too much." The horse took one step forward, then another. After the consumption took him, the town decided I'd be better as their cautionary tale than their neighbor. She watched as Obsidian approached the bucket, his movements deliberate. "People need something to stand against, I suppose. Makes them feel righteous." As darkness claimed the valley, Amelia sat in companionable silence with the creature the town feared neither moved to close the distance between them. Some trusts were built in inches, not miles. Some wounds healed only when left uncovered to the air dot in the distance. A coyote called a lonely sound that echoed off the mountains and returned transformed, as if the night itself had given it depth. Tomorrow, Amelia promised him, we begin to prove them wrong. Chapter 3. 3 weeks passed. Autumn painted the cottonwoods gold along the creek, while rumors grew like weeds through Cedar Creek. Some said the widow Thornwood spoke to the devil horse in whispers learned from a Navajo medicine man. Others claimed she fed it special herbs that dulled its spirit. The more charitable suggested that perhaps her size simply intimidated the beast into submission. None guessed the truth that Amelia approached Obsidian with neither expectation nor demand, only the patient recognition of a kindred soul. She hadn't touched him yet, not once. Each morning and evening, she entered the paddock, placed his feet and sat on her crate. Sometimes she spoke, other times they shared silence. The distance between them shrank by increments, from 7 paces to 5, then 3, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his massive frame, smell the wild sage caught in his mane. Today would be different. The rain had fallen steadily since midnight, transforming the paddock into a slick expanse of mud. Amelia watched from her window as Obsidian paced, agitated by the confinement and the weather. Lightning split the eastern sky, followed by thunder that shook the small cottage. The stallion reared hooves pawing at air. Enough, Amelia murmured, pulling her oilskin coat over her shoulders. The wind nearly tore the door from her hands as she stepped outside. Rain plastered her dress to her body, defining every curve society deemed excessive. She struggled through the mud to the paddock gate, fingers numb as she worked the latch. Easy now, she called over the storm's voice. Easy. Obsidian, the stallion, wheeled toward her, eyes rolling white with fear. A creature of open plains trapped in mud and thunder. Dangerous, thought Amelia. Knew fear when she saw it, had worn it herself often enough. Fear of judgment, fear of confinement, fear of never being seen as more than the space one occupied. She didn't hesitate. 3 broad strides brought her to the center of the paddock. Rain streamed down her face, catching in the creases around her mouth. You're not meant for small spaces, she said. Neither am I. Obsidian's nostrils flared as he assessed her. This woman who took up so much room in a world that afforded her so little. Slowly, deliberately, Amelia extended her hand, palm up, empty, an invitation, not a demand. Trust is earned, she told him. I've waited. Now I'm asking. The stallion lowered his head, breath forming steam in the cool air. For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, neither moved. Then, with the delicacy of falling snow, Obsidian pressed his muzzle against her palm. Warm, velvet, alive. Tears mixed with rainwater on Amelia's cheeks. There now, she whispered. There now. The crack of a rifle shattered the moment. Obsidian reared, nearly striking her as he wheeled away. Amelia turned toward the sound, rain blinding her momentarily. Through the downpour she made out 3 figures at the edge of her property. One held a rifle pointed skyward. Step away from the animal, Mrs. Thornwood. Harold Jenkins' voice carried over the storm's rumble. We're done waiting for tragedy. Beside him stood his brother Elias, twisted in his wheelchair beneath an oilskin cover, face contorted with bitter vindication. The third man was Thomas Reed, whose son had broken his arm during one of the 30 failed attempts to break Obsidian. Amelia placed herself between the men and the horse. You're trespassing. We're preventing a death, Jenkins replied, lowering the rifle to aim at Obsidian. Sheriff's given his blessing, though he hadn't the stomach to come himself. The law's got no place between a man and justice. Jenkins sighted down the barrel. Now move aside. The rain fell harder, drumming against the earth like impatient fingers. Behind her, Obsidian snorted, muscles bunched for flight or fight. There was nowhere for him to run. The paddock gate remained open, but beyond it lay only the open yard, the cottage, and the road leading back to town. 3 men waited with death in their hands. Amelia felt something cold and resolute settle in her chest. If you want this horse, she said, voice carrying the quiet certainty of Riverstone, you'll have to shoot through me to get him. Jenkins' jaw tightened. Don't be a fool, woman. I've been called worse. She spread her arms, making herself an even larger target. My property, my horse, my choice. Lightning illuminated the tableau. 3 men with justice on their lips and vengeance in their hearts. A woman too substantial to be dismissed. A horse that had never known kindness until it was offered without condition. Elias Jenkins said to his brother, tell her what that devil did to you. The man in the wheelchair spat into the mud, crushed my spine, took my legs, took my future. And how many times did you strike him with your whip before he threw you? Amelia asked quietly. Silence, broken only by the rain. 14, Elias finally admitted. But that's how you break a wild thing. No, Amelia said. That's how you create something broken. She lowered her arms, suddenly weary. I won't move. So make your choice, Harold Jenkins. Murder a woman on her own property, or go home and consider that perhaps some wounds can't be healed with more wounding. A long moment passed. Jenkins' finger remained on the trigger. Then, with a curse that disappeared into the storm, he lowered the rifle. "This isn't finished," he warned. "Few things ever are," Amelia replied. She watched them retreat, Ilyas's wheelchair, leaving parallel tracks in the mud. Only when they disappeared into the curtain of rain did she turn back to Obsidian. The stallion stood at the open gate, watching her, waiting. "It's all right," she told him softly. Some storms pass quickly. As if understanding, Obsidian stepped forward and pressed his forehead against her shoulder. The weight of him, solid, warm, trusting, nearly brought Amelia to her knees. Chapter 4. The following Sunday dawned clear and cool, the storm's evidence lingering only in puddles that reflected a cloudless sky. Amelia stood before her wardrobe, fingers tracing the single dress she reserved for church, navy blue with ivory buttons that strained against her girth. She hadn't attended services since Easter, when Reverend Holcomb's sermon on gluttony had seemed directed at her alone, his eyes finding hers during every mention of flesh and weakness. Today would be different. She dressed with deliberate care, pinning her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. No adornment, no pretense, just a woman claiming her place. In the paddock, Obsidian waited, watching as she approached with a simple hackamore, no bit to force his compliance, just rope and knots. Their understanding had deepened since the confrontation with Jenkins. The stallion allowed her touch now, leaned into her hands when she brushed his coat until it gleamed like polished coal. "Today we face them together," she told him, fitting the hackamore over his elegant head. He accepted it without resistance. They need to see what happens when judgment gives way to patience. Mounting required ingenuity. Amelia led Obsidian to the porch steps, where she stood on the second rise. Even then, swinging her leg over his back demanded more flexibility than she'd needed in years. The stallion stood motionless, as if understanding the importance of the moment. "There now," she murmured, settling her substantial weight. "A perfect fit." They moved down the road toward Cedar Creek, Amelia's skirt spreading across Obsidian's haunches like spilled ink. The sun warmed her face, and for the first time in years, she felt neither apologetic for her size nor invisible within it. The horse's muscles bunched and released beneath her, power held in check by choice, not force. The first houses appeared at the edge of town. A child spotted them and ran inside, shouting. By the time they reached Main Street, doorways filled with onlookers, windows framed astonished faces, conversations halted mid-sentence. Amelia sat straight, her bulk balanced perfectly on Obsidian's back. She didn't smile, didn't nod in greeting, simply existed unapologetically present on a horse that 30 men had failed to master. Outside, a general store, Sheriff Gaines stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt. His expression shifted from disbelief to grudging respect as they approached. "Mrs. Thornwood," he managed. "That's quite an accomplishment." "Not mine," she replied. His he chose to trust when he had every reason not to. The church bell began to toll, calling the faithful to worship. Amelia guided Obsidian toward the white-clad building with its modest steeple. The townsfolk parted before them, a reluctant sea yielding to an unexpected force. At the hitching post, Harold Jenkins stood with his brother Elias, whose wheelchair gleamed with fresh polish for Sunday service. The brothers watched her approach, enmity evident in the tight lines around their mouths. Amelia drew Obsidian to a halt before them. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, addressing both men with a single nod. Elias looked up at her, then at the stallion that had cost him his legs. Something complicated moved across his features, hatred mingled with fascination. "How did you do it?" he finally asked. "How did you break him without breaking him?" "I saw him," Amelia replied simply. "All of him, not just the parts that frightened me." She dismounted then, an awkward descent that she completed with as much dignity as she could muster. Standing beside Obsidian, one hand resting on his neck, she addressed the gathering crowd. "This horse will be giving rides to the children after service, any child whose parents permit it." She looked directly at Jenkins. "Even those who fear what they don't understand." A murmur passed through the assembly. Reverend Holcomb emerged from the church, drawn by the commotion. His eyes widened at the sight of Amelia and the stallion that had become local legend. "Mrs. Thornwood," he stammered. "This is ... unexpected." "God's grace often is, Reverend." She smiled, the expression transforming her face from plain to luminous. "Isn't that what you teach us?" She led Obsidian to the shade of an old cottonwood beside the church and secured his hackamore to a low branch. The horse stood calmly, watching the procession of people entering the church with curious eyes. Amelia followed them inside, her substantial frame navigating the narrow space between pews with practiced ease. She chose a seat near the back, folding her hands in her lap as whispers danced around her like autumn leaves. Throughout the service, she felt eyes upon her, some curious, others wary. Reverend Holcomb stumbled twice during his sermon on mercy, his gaze finding hers with unsettling frequency. When the final hymn concluded, Amelia rose and made her way outside. She found a small crowd gathered around Obsidian, children reaching tentative hands toward his gleaming coat. "He won't bite?" a small girl asked, thumb firmly planted in her mouth. "Not if you approach with respect," Amelia replied. one by one. She lifted children onto Obsidian's back, first for seated portraits their proud parents supervised anxiously, then for slow walks around the churchyard. The stallion carried each child with the gentle care of one who understands the precious nature of innocence. Near the church steps, Elias Jenkins watched, his brother standing rigid beside him. "Your turn, Mr. Jenkins," Amelia said when the children had all had their fill. "I don't need your charity," Elias spat. "It's not charity," she replied, "it's reconciliation."